Hey guys, welcome back to my channel today. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my thoughts on the new Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. It actually did come in yesterday and I have been playing around with it a little bit, but I do have some crazy news already about it. The palette came with a number of shades broken and about 8 of them to be exact. There is a 28 pan palette in here and 8 of them are broken. So wasn't a good start to our journey with this palette, but I was able to kind of squish them down a little bit. I'm going to show you guys the outer packaging of this. This is what it looks like here. So we do have a dark blue kind of teal packaging. It is smaller than her larger palettes as well, so just keep that in mind, but it is really beautiful. And when you open it up, I'm going to do it ever so lightly, you guys, because mine is an absolute disaster. So I'm going to try really hard. So as you can see, it is fairly damaged. We do have quite a few of them that I've pushed back in, and I will show you guys my thoughts on all of this, but I've already taken a number of pictures with it too in case it kind of falls on us. But this is the palette here. It is super beautiful, you guys. Definitely a warm tone palette, and I have so many thoughts on all of this. I will show you the swatches. I'll also show you all the comparisons to the other Natasha palettes I have, which I have just a bit, just a few. So I'll be sharing the comparisons to all of these guys and letting you guys know my thoughts on the palette and if it's actually worth purchasing. So this palette is pricey, of course. It is a Natasha Denona product, but it's not as pricey as her large palette. So we do have these palettes here that actually have a little bit less shades. So this is the Lila palette, and this one has 15 shades, I believe, yes. So as you can see, the pans here are a lot larger than the midi size, which is what she's doing with the Metropolis palette. So you can see how the Metropolis palette is smaller than the Lila palette when it comes to pan size. And the cost of Metropolis is $129 US or 170 Canadian. So that is the cost actually of a big palette like this. Like this is around that same cost, but of course you're getting a lot more shades with Metropolis because it's a smaller pan size. I do like that she's done that because it does give some more variety for us for the same price point, unfortunately, but I still think that if you're getting a little bit more shades for that price point, that's always a little bit better. Taking a quick peek at my phone, Sephora also says that this is a palette that is free from parabens. It's also cruelty free, and it is going to be available in store September 26th. So if you are interested in looking at it in store, it's going to be a couple more weeks until you can do that. So first, let's talk about how I created my look today using the Metropolis palette. First of all, I went all over the lid with a Wayne Goss number 18, and I actually used a matte shade. This is the shade Rope. It's definitely a warmed tone kind of base color, and it's really beautiful. It has a little bit of elements of some oranginess to it. Next, I went in with a gold color, and I did use a denser brush for this, and I used the Sigma E60, which is a large shader, and I went in with the shade Orium. This is interesting because it has a nice duochrome shift that has a gorgeous greeny yellow kind of pull. It's absolutely beautiful, and I love how it looked on the eye right away. Lastly, I went in with the blue. I wanted to do something definitely more bold with this palette and get to the blues, but also wanted to make sure it was something that was going to be very wearable. So this blue is called Aqueous or Aqueous. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And I did go into kind of the other half of the lid, kind of blending it outwards with a detailed brush actually that I got from Refer Brushes. This one is actually fairly sheer at first, especially when you're using a bit of a looser brush, but it does build up really nicely to make an excellent blue color. I do think it is perfect for the holidays, and as you can see here, the finished look is very wearable in my opinion. You do have that blue, but you also have some gold in there, so it's not like super bold or anything like that, but it does make a nice colorful impact on the eye. When I got to the first glitter, that's when I had a little bit of fallout on my face, and that's also perfectly normal for Natasha Denona. I do think you can go in with a finger and really kind of swipe across the lid for more of an amplified look, but you are going to get some fallout nonetheless, so make sure that you're doing your eyes first before any of your base products, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit hard to clean up when you already have your foundation on your face. Because the blue also has a bit of a shimmer component, I also found some fallout with this one. So honestly, I do think that that's just kind of par for the course with her formula. I haven't seen any huge red flags yet when it comes to wow, this doesn't blend or that isn't pigmented. I do think that she has some very interesting formulas in this palette where she has some that are a little bit more sheer, more like toppers, and you do have to build them up a little bit more. Then she has some true shimmers, she has some duochromes, and the mattes to me have been fairly consistent. Now, as you guys can see, this palette has a number of different elements to it. We do have some Biba elements, which is her kind of neutral palette. We have some gold elements as well, and there are some shades in my opinion, that are close to Sunset in here. So I decided to do a whole bunch of comparisons as well. So let's get to all of the comparisons. First, let's talk about the gold palette. So as you can see, there are some elements when you see the pans side by side, how they look. We do have one peachy shade that looks really gross in my Metropolis palette. And honestly, it's because I had to push that one in the most. It was the most shattered. So that one just looks disgusting. So I do apologize for that. But when I was actually pushing some of these mattes in, especially the matte kind of formula, it's actually like a creamy clay. It's so weird. I was pushing it in and I was like, wow, this is really creamy. So that's going to be interesting to kind of take a look at when I'm applying all of them to the lid, because they do feel very creamy to like the touch when you're pushing them back into their pan. So anyways, with the gold palette, I wanted to see which shades from Metropolis looked similar. And as you can see, we do have some similarities here. They're not going to make that much of an impact difference on the eye. Like they are very, very close. Although when you zoom in, you can see some differences, of course, like some are more brown, some are more copper. We also have some blue shades here. The blues are different. I will give her that. So the blues in Metropolis do have more of a royal blue and a greeny blue next to a gray blue in the gold palette. And we do have some very pigmented dark mattes in this palette as well. One thing I will say is that when I was actually swatching the dark mattes, they were staining my arm very quickly. So I do think they're going to have a staining component to it. I think that's what she's trying to do with the longevity of the shadows on the lid. But as a consumer, I'm also like, oh, does that mean I have to scrape my eye basically when I'm taking them off? So that is something that I will also be doing more of an in-depth review on later on and doing a follow-up to this palette review. Next, I looked at some of the browns in the gold palette and looked at the Metropolis palette and compared them. And we do have quite a difference, I would say, between those. And we also have some shimmery browns as well that are different in each. Next, let's take a look at Biba, because I wanted to see how many of those were different or not. And as you can see, just kind of looking at the palette side by side, we do have some elements that they are very similar, but when you actually swatch them, there are some distinct differences. These are two palettes I think that at first I thought would be very similar to each other, but when kind of looking at the browns, I was like, oh, yeah, they are still pretty distinctly different. So that's actually good to know, especially if you're a Natasha Denona collector and you have your eye on this palette. Now let's go to Sunrise, because there's a few in Sunrise that caught my attention, in particular two shades. And these, you guys, are so similar to each other, which I was kind of like, huh. I mean, as you can see, maybe some of them are a little bit like a touch bolder or a touch more copper, but they are very, very close. When I took a look at the Tropic palette, I saw literally nothing between them that I thought would be dupable at all. So I just looked at the two together and I was like, no, I don't see any of these. They're all distinctly different. Either the blue is a bright blue matte in Tropic, or it is like a shimmery silver. Like it's definitely not at all the same. So I just skipped on those. And then I went in with Sunset, and Sunset also has some pretty close shades as well. The golds, again, similar, and we do have a bit of like a pinky copper kind of red color that is also very similar. She's pulling some inspiration from a number of different palettes here, but I do think that it's kind of becoming clear that it's not like this distinctly no shade is identical kind of palette. There's definitely some similarities between other releases. Lastly, we have the Lila palette, and I just found one that was pretty close, but again, they are distinctly different too. Like they're similar in that they kind of come from the same color family, but one is definitely more of a red and one is more of an orange. Now let's get to the swatches as well, because this is something I wanted to also touch base on with you. So here we have the first two rows, and these to me, okay, this is another thing that besides pulling from themes from her other palettes, she also has two shades that almost have been copied in her palette. So she has 4 shades where I'm like, why? Like, I don't understand why you've done this. When you look at the first 2 rows of swatches, you will see them right away. It's kind of like a brownie gold with a bit of a duochrome shift. Those two look so close. She didn't need to include both of those shades, in my opinion. And the last two rows have a very distinct dark blue matte that look very, very similar upon a swatch. So when you actually zoom in with your eyes, we do have one that has more of a green and one that's more of a blue. But as you can see, when they're swatched like this, it looks like the difference is super, super small. So that is interesting to me. Although the difference is there, it is slight, but I wish that she would have had a little bit more distinction between those shades as well, and especially the other two shades I talked about in the first two rows, because you're kind of just wasting space at this point. Like, put in a new shade. You know, you have a 28 shade palette. You don't have to copy the same shade within it. Overall, I think that this palette is actually going to be a good buy if you do have your eye on it and you're looking for the quality and the consistency of the shades. So far, so good in my first impression video here. I do think that these shades are not going to let you down in that way, but what I will say is that it definitely is apparent that she's pulled some inspiration from some of her previous releases. So that's just going to be kind of what you guys decide if you think that this palette's going to be worth it to you or not. For me, if this is my only holiday palette purchase, I'll actually be really happy because a lot of the other holiday stuff isn't really interesting me lately, but this is one that I do know I can rely on for a consistent formula. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope all of this information was helpful for you. Let me know down below if this Metropolis palette is on your wish list or not. I'd be very curious. And until my next video, take care. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.
You and me, everything that we've been through has made us strong. You won't believe we've had our gray, but somewhere there's a light inside of us. It shows the way.